For 1,000 years or more, the Pacific Northwest people have depended on the sea for their source of most of their food. Around the end of March, when the spring tides are very high, the Ooligans begin their spawning cycle, and the people prepare to harvest their year's supply of grease, which was also used to trade with the people from the interior of the province, or in that time in the interior of the continent. The grease trails were traveled by, I presume, hundreds and hundreds of people, and they packed this stuff on their backs in containers, in wooden containers, in cedar boxes they'd made, and they used it as a main source of trading with the people from the interior, and it was one of their main food supplies. They got their total fat almost from these Ooligans. We used to call them, the white men came and called them candlefish, because the Ooligan was when you dried it, you could light the tail end and it would actually burn with a very smoky little flame. The fish are about 6 to 10 inches long, the males being the biggest of the species. The females are smaller. Now these people harvested these fish this is the old-fashioned method. They don't use it anymore. You notice those stakes that are driven in the river. Those are hemlock sticks driven way down into the gravel bar, 3 or 4 or 5 feet deep in the bar, so they could hold these long funnel-shaped nets. The nets are about 80, 90, up to 100 feet long. They're about 20 to 25 feet wide at the mouth, and they taper down like a funnel to a very small bottom. The end of the net is laced shut, and when the tide, this is close to the ocean, so when the tide comes in at nighttime, they would open the upper stream end of the net. And as the tide came up, the fish would come with it, and they would drift up the stream and spawn, and then the tide would change and the current would wash these little fish back down the river, and they would go into the mouth of these long nets and build up by the ton. I have seen 3-4 ton in one of these nets at one time. Now they did all this with dugout canoes, and there's none left now in the Bella Coola system. They've been either worn out or they've drifted away to sea. But they were the main source of travel for these people on the whole Bella Coola River system. When Alexander Mackenzie came across Canada by land in 1793, he came across the plateau country and came down into the valley. And that's how he got his transportation from the head of the valley down to the ocean. There you see where there's 2 or 3 nets hanging there, 2 nets hanging there, both closed up. One of them is being unloaded with fish. You can just see how long it is. Mackenzie said that these people were the best canoemen he'd ever met in his lifetime, and Mackenzie had used the French voyageur to go across Canada, and he'd gone down to the Arctic Ocean down the Mackenzie River. So that was quite a compliment to the Bella Coola people, being tremendous canoemen, and they didn't paddle. They used stakes in the shallow water of the river and these long, thin canoes made out of a cedar tree. If you and I were to get into one of these canoes, we'd have it upside down in a minute. While I was taking this picture, an airplane landed on the river. And some of you might have heard of old Ralph Edwards, the Crusoe of Lonesome Lake. Well, that was Ralph in his Taylor craft that landed that day right out in front where we were fishing, where these people were fishing. The Bella Coola people worked together in family groups. This was mostly Snow family here and relatives. There was Peter Snow and his mother, old Lady Snow, old Mrs. Snow, I don't remember her first name. And some of the Webbers here, Tommy Wackus, Willie Schooner. Most of the people were related, and they work in family groups and they catch these fish, and part of the fish, the large males, the women are sorting out right now. They're picking out the large males, and these will go into buckets, and they'll take them back over to the village side, the other side of the river, and they'll put them in their smokehouses. They have a special way of taking a fine cedar stick about 20 inches long, and they run it through the fish's mouth and out the gill. The stick's about as big as a lead pencil, and they hang them up on sticks on racks in their smokehouses, and they put these away. They dry them and put them away for the winter. Now, of course, we use freezers. When the rest of the fish are put in buckets and carried up the bank and put into this box. Now this box is about 6 or 8 feet square, made out of planks, and on the ground they cover the ground with cedar boughs, nice clean cedar boughs, about a couple of 3 inches thick, and then they dump these fish in on top. Now this is a special process. A lot of people call these boxes stink boxes because they leave the fish there for about 10 days. We'll see a little shot of that later on. But it's quite a job. Families all work together. Children, mothers and fathers, grandfathers and grandmothers work together. And this is a bit of a preliminary time here with this group of people because I'd asked the Siwalis family if I could do a documentary on them. There's Peter Snow. Peter's still there. Simon Schooner, not with us any longer. One of the old timers in the village at that time. Sort of early in the morning, there's Mrs. Snow. That's why the light's poor. I didn't have much light to work with, and I did the best I could, but it was around 6 a.m. when I took these pictures in the end of March, first part of April. And here's the family. The women are gathered around the top. Now, there's the smokehouse fish all ready to go back home again. They still do it this way, although they don't use the same funnel-shaped nets. There's Flossie Weber in the middle and Peter Snow's wife on the left. Tommy Walkus in the background there with the hat on. And this gal with the yellow sweater is Dinah Schooner. And Dinah was a minister for a while. Sort of a happy time of year. The Bella Coola people look forward to the Ooligan. The winter's been pretty long usually. There's no doubt that there's some of them in the old days, would be running short of fish and short of oil and grease and so on. And these fish, everybody in the valley, all of the white people and everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of the people come down there. The Indians catch all you want, and you can go down there with your bucket or your buckets and fill up and take them home. And pretty well a lot of people in the valley, especially in the old days, used to eat 3 or 4 or 5 feeds of Ooligans. Matter of fact, I think we ate Ooligans for once a day for about 4 or 5 days until we got tired of them. Used to be a little competition between some of the men. How many can you eat? And I remember one friend of mine, a native fellow, could eat 24 at a sitting. And boy, let me tell you, that's a lot of Ooligans. And they're so rich that after you've eaten a dozen or so, all you want to do is go lay down and go to sleep. They're really rich in oil. Look at how narrow that dugout is. Tippy? You bet it's tippy. But those fellows have got wonderful sense of balance. Of course, they were raised on the river. The river was their highway. And in the old days, the Bella Coola people used to keep the river for 50 miles clear of log jams because they recognized that log jams were damaging to their highway. Nowadays, of course, we don't touch the log jams, and it has a habit of making the river not very good. It hurts the spawning grounds and so on. But the Indians were smart. They kept the river clean. It was the main part of their deal. And they took these canoes, and they could pole these canoes all the way up the Bella Coola River for about 45 miles up to where Mackenzie came down over the mountain to what they called the Friendly Village at the mouth of Burnt Bridge Creek. And then above that, there was the old big village of Stewie. And they would go right to Stewie with these canoes from Bella Coola. No road, of course, in those days. And why walk through the bush when you could go by canoe? These men are taking the smokehouse fish back home. The village is on the east side, and the pits are on the west side. I wonder why. Well, I'll tell you. You wouldn't want to have that stink box right in your backyard. Not really. Of course, seagulls come in. Thousands and thousands of seagulls come in, and they clean up the dead fish that are lying around and the residue from the cook boxes. There's a lot of waste here goes out into the river, and the seagulls are great scavengers, and they really clean up the area. And by the way, and another thing too, at this time of the year, the salmon fry are coming down the river from upstream, and the little fish eat the cooked Ooligan grease, or cooked Ooligan matter, the fish. Now this is a close-up of one of those funnel-shaped nets, and this is the Siwalis net. The Siwalis family was working together. Margaret, which you'll see later on, was sort of the star of the show, and that's her son Andy in front, and that's her son-in-law, Peter Elliott, and then her nephew there, and Joe Siwalis, her youngest son, at the end of the back end of the canoe. Andy's still going strong, and Andy was a good friend of mine. He's the fellow there, and right there on the left with the pale green shirt on. And Andy guided for me, grizzly guiding for 7 or 8 years. I still see Andy regularly. Quite a process. You'll notice they section the net off in sections. There's a reason for this, because you can only lift so many fish at one time. That's a very special stick that Andy's got. It's a regular tree, and that's a natural bend in the natural limb growing out there. They've cut it specially so it's tough. And they'll separate off of 100 to 150 pounds of these fish, enough that they can handle, work it down to the end of the net, let the water drip off a bit, and then dump it into the canoe. And Joe at the back end has to keep continually bailing water out because there's always a bit of water gets into the canoe. It's hard work. Here I've got good light. They waited until the sun came up well up before I got these pictures, and it was sort of nice of them to do that. Maybe 150 pounds in that bag there. Probably a ton or two, maybe 2 tons in the net altogether. In the old days, before they had linen, people ask me, what did they do before they had linen? Well, you know, the people had developed a type of fiber, a type of stuff that they could use. It was from stinging nettles. They would take these long stinging nettles, about 6, 7, 8, 10 feet long. They would bury them in rotten logs and wait till the outside rotted off. And in the inside was the strong fiber, and they wove their nets out of that, or they made their nets out of that. When I first came to the Bella Coola Valley in 1951, there was still one of those old nets left, and it's sad to say it got burnt in a fire. The house burnt down and burnt the net. Now there's a canoe load. Wouldn't want to put many more in that. You imagine you add 4 of those men on top of that and come down that river for a quarter mile or so, where they're down to where they've got their pit. Nowadays, they do it the way it's done right here. We're going to see now. This is a seine net. It's an old herring seine that these people have acquired, and they put a cork line on the top and a lead line on the bottom. Very fine mesh, probably a 1/2 inch mesh, so the fish can't get through it. And they seine these fish. Now they don't use the old funnel nets anymore. They use a seine net. There's a man who's mending a couple of holes. They've got to get rid of the holes because fish are amazing. They can, if there's a hole in the net, they'll find it and get out. So the net's got to be pretty sound. And there's a large school of hooligans just lying off the shore from where I was standing. And they knew they were there. They stayed there, and they were going upstream above these fish. And you'll see them here set their net. There was a reason for this. Some people from Bella Bella, from a village out near the coast, about 80 miles away, had come in with a seine boat. And over the centuries, the Bella Bellas and the Bella Coola, when they weren't fighting with each other, were trading with each other. And the Bella Bella people would bring in herring eggs and different other types of seafood, and they would trade with the Bella Coolas for hooligan grease and sopalally berries. And so these fellows this time were going to go out and catch a mess of hooligans, probably a ton or more, to give to their friends from Bella Bella. Nowadays there's quite a bit of intermarrying between Bella Coola and Bella Bella people. And they communicate back and forth regularly. Okay, they've gone up the river. You see the man on the left, he's got the upper end going into the shore, going to hold onto that rope. The boat's anchored, and they're going to start setting the net out in the middle of the river, and then he'll cut a circle downstream, and try to get around these fish. Now the net, of course, will drift with the current. They want to get it out as fast as they can. Roger Tallio rowing the boat. Louis Edgar throwing the net out. Roger's still there in Bella Coola. Louis gone. Quite a long net. 150 or so feet long. Okay, they've got it all out. Now the big thing is to get to the shore as quickly as they can and to purse this net in. Purse seine it in. That's why they call it purse seines. And to get it in and stop the fish from escaping. Now there's still an open gap there between the boat and the shore. So they set up a big commotion. They throw rocks and they splash the water and stuff to keep a disturbance going so that the fish will be scared and they'll stay upstream. And that's the reason. They fill these skiffs up with rocks to make all this commotion here. Very quickly they get the net into the beach. Look at them slap the water there. Always a few fish. Okay, they're pulling in the end. Now they've got the thing pursed in. A few minutes have gone by, not many minutes. And they've got the lead line up underneath. Cork lines floating, and they're looking to see if they've got any sign of fish. And really, right at this present moment, they don't see many. And all of a sudden, as they get the net in closer, it looks like we've got some. Sort of a little cheer goes up. Got lots, somebody said. And sure enough, you'll see as we get all the fish thrown into the middle of the bag. They're in a bag. They can't get out. Everybody's happy. The little fish stick to the net, but they can't get stuck in it. The mesh is too small. Hooligans. Hooligans and more hooligans. They caught a rock. What do you know? That happens. Now we've got a bag full. And now they'll start to braille these fish out of there with a dip net and fill up their skiffs. They had about 3 or 4 skiff loads that day, more than enough to give to their friends from Bella Bella. Everybody says, let's relax and have a smoke. Hooligans, we're taping this here in near the end of March, and the fish will be starting to come in Bella Coola right about now. I won't be home for the run, but I've got some friends that will freeze a half a dozen ice cream pails full of hooligans and cover them with water, and they keep very well. We don't dress them, we don't gut them until we go to eat them, and we freeze them whole, and they keep just like fresh, covered with ice. When the Indians bring in these nets full of fish now, they use seine boats now, there's always 2 or 3 dozen people from the valley that like to go down and fill up their buckets and have their fresh feed of hooligans. There's Louis Edgar helping to unload this net. There's Wilfred Weber. Wilfred was back in the valley here the other day. I think he lives around Dallas, Short Bay. I'm not sure now. But he's a local fellow. There you are, hooligans right up to your boot tops. For the little, but they accomplished their purpose, and everybody's quite happy. Now, 10 days have gone by. Since family over there the river, sort of a blustery day. Now's the time of separating oil from the fish. These people discovered many years ago that when the fish got slightly old, the oil naturally better than the fish. So these fish into in this bathtub, and they've got another close by. See it in it. Tin bottom with a fire built underneath. And some people ask, what did they do before tin bottom? 50, 60-pound rocks, which they got real hot. And now that box is 2/3 full with water, and then they dump bring it back. Tell you if you cold or sinus trouble, I'll tell you fix it. You just hang your nose over and take a real deep breath. I'll guarantee you'll never have a cold again. Okay, we got the fish. The water's hot, but not boiling, and they're going to bring this mess of fish and water to a boil. A little bit, Steve. You put the lid on, and people use driftwood down the river. They go out there and they find a cedar tree, use cedar or any fact burned up on the beach ahead of time and let it dry out partly, and then they split it up with their and use it for fuel to cook these fish. It doesn't take very long for the fish from that point to already very low. There's Albert side trying to cut the knot with the axe place. Now there's the product. It's finished as is concerned. So all the separate gallons and gallons of ice cold water out of the river, and they notice how full soon as the coal hits this mass of fish, the oil begins to separate, and it comes to the top. Very homemade, nice skims it off. We're getting close to the process, and they've got to get rid of debris. Now, this is a star Mark lady. A couple of 3 years before she died, she was given a master's degree by Fraser University. And the reason for this was that Margaret was a great help to the people who were studying the culture of the Northwest. And she detail very well. She was a lovely person. Top of the box, purify it. So these aluminum buckets, you know, they got little small rocks, dip into the water to wash the ashes off, then drop the hot rock into the oil. Now, what it is, it's the moisture out of the oil. The oil will not keep if it's got water mixed in with it. So you see steam coming off now. This is what home rock, the bucket of clean water. A few minutes, the oil finally gets rid of all the moisture in there. To a real finished product. See what happens? The moisture disappear, but the impurities come to the top. Like some of you women who have made jelly and take here fish, and they want to end up with a pure to the campfire. Makes good food. This 10, 20 buckets that size of grease for themselves. Now the final stage, clean cotton in about a 5-gallon container, and she'll pour this oil through the cloth. It ends up very polished, best could pop. Taste to this stuff or no smell. It's palatable, only you don't try. I know Margaret said to me right about this time, she said, "Would you like to have lunch with us?" I said, "Yeah, I'd." And she was working over there by the table they had, and I noticed a few things. She had a nice jar made plum jam. She was going to with a big ingredient. They stuff in bottles and gallons. It never gets real hard, even if it gets old. It always is sort of. Now they're very fussy people. After every cooking batch, they wash out the box. They're very careful. Take residue up. Coming on. This method of getting, see that nice, well, have a water pump in, they got all right, but there was old power saw taken off, and they've got a little pulley in the power saw, and they've got a belt, and Peter, there's whole ingenious way to pump water and lots of pressure. Wash out the box, flush the residue, fill it up. There's your. There's Margaret working in the background getting. Good hot. Cool day. She's making, some people would call it bannock powder, flour, water, a little baking some salt. And while she's doing this, she makes some stories about her. I just heard her voice. Lunch. She's deep eating. We call them Oogan biscuits.